The second my sister leaned over my daughter's hospital bed and whispered that the world might be better off if she didn't make it, my 7-year-old son looked her dead in the eye and said 5 words that turned the entire room to ice. And baby, that was only the beginning. Let me tell you what 41 looks like when you're living inside the wrong life. It looks like a 4-bedroom, 5-bath limestone townhouse on Astor Street in Chicago's Gold Coast, a neighborhood so old money quiet that the loudest thing on the block on a Tuesday morning is a UPS truck making a delivery. It looks like a standing reservation at Boca and a membership at the East Bank Club and a husband, Prescott Calloway, investment banker, 6'2", third-generation Northwestern man, who introduces you at parties as my beautiful wife Daphne, with an emphasis on beautiful that is meant to be a compliment but has always landed, for me, like a lid being pressed down on something. It looks like a life that other women photograph from the outside and caption with words like goals and blessed and living the dream, and from the outside they are not entirely wrong. I have a daughter named Remy who is 11 and reads at a high school level and has her father's cheekbones and my grandmother's laugh. I have a son named Caleb who is 7 and built like a question mark, always leaning into something, always watching, always thinking 3 moves ahead in that quiet way that you do not expect from a second grader. I have a sister named Vivian who is 44 and the kind of beautiful that requires maintenance and whose attention has always felt like a searchlight, briefly warm, ultimately looking for something. And I have a mother-in-law named Constance Calloway who lives in Winnetka in the house she has occupied for 40 years and who has never once, in the 12 years I have been married to her son, called me by my first name without a half-second pause before it, as if she is remembering each time that she is required to acknowledge my existence. Here's what nobody tells you about wealthy families. The cruelty isn't loud. It doesn't have to be. It lives in the pause, the almost compliment, the smile that doesn't quite reach. And I had been fluent in that language for 12 years without ever once fighting back. Until October. Remy got sick in October, the way October in Chicago always feels, fast and cold and without mercy. She had been tired for weeks, the kind of tired that made her come in from school and not ask for a snack, not check her phone, just go horizontal on the couch with one arm over her eyes. I clocked it the second day it happened because I am the kind of mother who clocks things, who has always paid close attention, who stores details in a part of my brain that never fully sleeps. I called Dr. Farida Osei at Northwestern Medicine on a Wednesday, and by Friday we had a referral, and by the following Wednesday we had a diagnosis that changed the shape of our lives. A rare form of leukemia, treatable but aggressive, requiring immediate and sustained intervention. I will not linger on what it felt like to hear that word said about your child in a room with fluorescent lighting and a box of tissues on the windowsill that you do not reach for, because reaching for it would make it real. I will only say that I walked out of that hospital, sat in the parking garage in our car, and allowed myself exactly 9 minutes to be a human being who was terrified. Then I straightened up, put the car in drive, and started planning, because planning is what I do when the ground falls out from under me, and the ground had just fallen out hard. Prescott responded to Remy's diagnosis the way Prescott responds to most things that require sustained emotional presence, with an initial burst of the right words, "I'm here, we'll handle this, she's going to be fine," followed by a gradual retreat into his office, his phone, his 6 a.m. Peloton rides, the architecture of his days left largely unchanged, while mine became entirely about Lurie Children's Hospital and treatment schedules and the specific kind of vigilance that is required when your child is fighting for her life. My husband held my hand in the oncologist's office and said all the right things. What I didn't know yet was that all the right things was the only performance he had left, because while I was at the hospital watching my daughter fight, someone I trusted completely was doing something in my house I never saw coming. Vivian started coming around in November. She would show up at Lurie with cold brew from Intelligentsia and opinions about Remy's treatment team and that particular energy she's always had, busy, organized, indispensable, that I had spent our entire childhood interpreting as love. She and I had grown up in Naperville, daughters of a civil engineer and a school librarian. Nothing Gold Coast about us. Vivian had made her own money in real estate development. She drove a Range Rover and wore theory blazers and had the specific competence of a woman who has decided that competence is her entire personality. I had always admired her. That admiration, I now understand, was the most expensive thing I ever gave away for free. Constance Calloway also came around more in November. She brought casseroles I did not ask for to a house staffed with a personal chef and made comments about Remy's care in the careful, deniable language of a woman who has been making her daughter-in-law feel inadequate for 12 years without ever technically saying anything cruel. She and Vivian got along, which I had always taken as a good sign. Two strong women in my corner, I told myself. What a gift. What a fool I was. Caleb, my 7-year-old, had been quiet since Remy got sick, in the particular way that sensitive children go quiet when they are absorbing more than adults think they can hold. He did his homework, he ate dinner, he went to school, he watched everything. I would catch him sometimes looking at Vivian with an expression I could not read, something between wariness and the specific discomfort of a child who knows a thing and has not decided yet what to do with it. I would ask him what he was thinking, and he would shrug and say, "Nothing, Mom," and go back to whatever he was doing. My son had been watching things I couldn't see, and the thing about children who grow up in houses full of adults performing normalcy, they get very, very good at knowing when the performance is a lie. Caleb was 7 years old, and he was carrying something that was about to blow the roof off my entire life. It was a Tuesday in late November, 3 weeks into Remy's first treatment cycle. She had responded well, the doctors said, which is the phrase that becomes the most beautiful sound in the English language when it is said about your child. I had stepped out of her room to take a call from her school about a makeup assignment. 11 minutes, I know because I looked at my phone when I came back and tracked the gap, and when I walked through the door, the room was wrong. I felt it before I understood it, the way you feel a temperature drop before you consciously register cold. Vivian was standing close to Constance's chair with her back to the window. The afternoon light was flat and gray behind her. 2 of Prescott's cousins, who had come to visit, were seated on the small bench by the door. Remy was asleep, that hollowed-out, treatment-deep sleep that my daughter wore on Tuesdays like a second skin. And Vivian, in what I now know was not a slip but a performance, was whispering in a voice that was exactly loud enough, "I'm just saying what everyone in this room is thinking. Maybe it's better if Remy doesn't survive this. Daphne is a curse on this family. Everything falls apart around her. That little girl would be in a better place than here with a mother like that." The room did not react the way a room should react to something like that. No one gasped, no one stood up. Constance made a small sound. It was, I realized, the sound of a woman relieved that the unsayable had finally been said. One of Prescott's cousins looked at the floor, the other looked at her phone, and then Caleb, who had been sitting in the corner chair with a book open on his lap that he had not been reading, stood up. He was wearing his blue hoodie and his Nikes, and he had his father's jawline and my eyes, and something else, something entirely his own, that I had always known was in him and had never seen deployed quite like this. He looked at Vivian with those eyes, and he said in a clear, flat, 7-year-old voice that left absolutely zero room for interpretation, "Aunt Vivian, should I tell everyone what you were doing at our house when Mom was at the hospital and you thought I was asleep?" The doctor who had just walked in with Remy's chart stopped moving. I counted 4 adults in that room who stopped breathing, and Vivian, my sister, my blood, the woman who had shown up with cold brew and concerned faces for 3 weeks, turned a color I had never seen on a human being before. Not white, something underneath white, something that looked like the end of a story. I stood in the doorway. I had been many things in my life. A daughter, a wife, a mother, a woman who smiles through things. But in that moment, I was none of them. I was only still. The specific stillness of a person whose entire nervous system has gone to emergency protocol, filtering everything, missing nothing. I crossed the room. I did not look at Vivian. I looked at my son. "Caleb, baby, come here." He walked to me with the self-possessed calm of someone who has made a decision and is at peace with it. He pressed into my side, and I put my arm around him, and I felt the shape of what he was carrying, whatever he knew, like a small, dense weight between us. I turned to the room. I made my face into something smooth and unreadable, which 12 years of marriage to a man who does not see you teaches you like nothing else can. I said quietly, to no one in particular, "I think visiting hours are over for today." No one argued. They left in the particular shuffling, eyes-down way of people who have witnessed something and are hoping that leaving quickly means they were never really there. Vivian went last. At the door, she turned and looked at me with an expression I can only describe as a calculation. Not guilt, not shame, just the specific look of a person measuring how much I knew and how much time they had. I held her gaze and gave her nothing, and she left. I sat in the chair beside Remy's bed. I listened to the monitor. I held my daughter's hand while she slept, and I looked at my son and said very gently, "You don't have to tell me tonight, but when you're ready, I'm here and I'm listening." He nodded. He picked up his book. He did not read it. And I sat in that hospital room in the gray November afternoon, and I began, very quietly, to understand that the life I thought I was living was not the life that had been happening. There is a specific kind of grief that is not about loss, but about revelation. Not the grief of something ending, but the grief of understanding that what you thought was real was a stage set, and you were the only one in the cast who didn't know it. That was what was sitting on my chest at 11 o'clock that Tuesday night. That, and one question. What exactly had my 7-year-old seen? He told me at home, on the kitchen floor with hot chocolate, which is the only appropriate setting for truths too large for furniture. He told me in pieces, in the way children tell things, starting in the middle, circling the edges, arriving at the center sideways. And what he told me was this. 6 weeks ago, on a Thursday afternoon in mid-October, the week Remy was first diagnosed, the week I barely slept, the week I was at Northwestern Medicine for 8 to 10 hours a day, Vivian had come to our house. She had a key because I had given it to her when we thought we might need help with Caleb's school pickups. Caleb had been home with a mild fever, being watched by our housekeeper Nadine, who had stepped out to the pharmacy for 20 minutes. Caleb had come downstairs for water and found Vivian in our kitchen, on the phone, reading from documents that were spread across our kitchen island. Our private documents, financial statements, our trust documents, our insurance policies. He had listened from the staircase, the way children listen when they understand that they are hearing something not meant for them. He told me she had said to whoever was on the phone, "The policies are exactly what we thought. If she goes before him, it all transfers cleanly. The trust language is airtight. We just need to be patient." She hadn't seen him. She'd stacked the documents and left. He had gone back to bed and held what he'd heard the way you hold something burning, carefully, at arm's length, waiting for the moment to put it down. That moment had been today, in Remy's hospital room, when he decided that Vivian's patience had run out of time. My sister had been standing in my kitchen, reading my insurance documents and discussing my death on the phone with someone. My daughter was in the hospital, my husband was barely home, and my 7-year-old had been carrying this alone for 6 weeks because he is braver than every adult in my life put together. What I felt sitting on that kitchen floor was not fear. It was the specific, cold clarity of a woman who finally understands the whole board. I put Caleb to bed at 9:30. I sat on the edge of his bed until his breathing slowed, and then I went to my home office, the small room off the kitchen that Prescott called Daphne's craft room with the dismissive warmth men use for spaces they don't take seriously, and I locked the door. I sat at my desk, I opened my laptop, and I began doing what I should have been doing years ago, in the candlelit silence of a Gold Coast townhouse where a great deal had apparently been happening without my knowledge or consent. I pulled up our joint financial accounts. I pulled up the insurance portal. I pulled up the trust documents in the cloud storage I managed but had not reviewed in 8 months because our estate attorney handled the annual updates and I had trusted that process completely. What I found when I actually read carefully, read the way a woman reads when she is reading for her life, was a set of recent amendments I did not remember authorizing. Amendment dates within the last 4 months, signature lines bearing my electronic signature, obtained through a process I could not immediately account for. Someone had been busy. And here is where the story changed for me, where I stopped being a woman things were happening to and became a woman with a plan. Because I am a licensed CPA. Did I mention that? People often forget because I stopped practicing when Remy was born, and because I live on Astor Street, and because I am the wife at the party that Prescott introduces as beautiful. But I graduated top of the class from DePaul. I spent 7 years at one of the largest accounting firms in Chicago before I became a full-time mother. I understand financial documents the way a surgeon understands anatomy, not as something to be reviewed, but as something to be read, with the specific literacy of someone who knows where things hide. And what was hiding in our amended trust documents, once I understood what I was reading, was a plan. Not a theory, a plan with dates and mechanics and a financial architecture that assumed I would not be around to challenge it. A plan that had a beneficiary structure that made a great deal more sense if you assumed that Prescott and Vivian were operating with a shared interest that had nothing to do with my well-being or my children's inheritance being protected for them. I sat in my craft room until 2 in the morning. Then I closed the laptop. I went upstairs, I slid into bed next to my husband, who was asleep, whose breathing was steady, who had no idea that the woman lying 4 inches from him had just become the most dangerous person in his life. I looked at the ceiling in the dark of our Gold Coast bedroom, and I made 2 promises, one to Remy, one to myself. And then, for the first time in weeks, I slept. What I hadn't found yet, what I didn't know to look for until a phone call 3 days later, was the part of the plan that explained why Vivian had stopped caring whether or not I survived. It turned out the insurance wasn't the half of it. The half of it was who she'd been sleeping with for the last 14 months, and what he had promised her, and what both of them had done, quietly, carefully, legally, to make sure that when the time came, I would have nowhere left to stand. There is a version of this story where I fell apart, where I cried in the right places and leaned on the wrong people, and let the ground keep shifting under me until there was nowhere left to stand. That woman existed. She lived inside me for 12 years, but she got out of bed on a Wednesday morning in November, drove to a law office on Michigan Avenue, and left her forwarding address. The phone call came on a Friday, 3 days after the hospital room and the kitchen floor and the 2 in the morning accounting session that changed the molecular structure of everything I thought I knew. It came from a number I didn't recognize, a 312 area code, and the woman on the other end introduced herself as Nadine's cousin, Nadine, our housekeeper who had been with our family for 6 years, and who, it turned out, had her own reasons for watching and waiting. Her name was Priya Balan. She was 38 years old, she told me, and she worked as a paralegal at a downtown Chicago firm. She had visited our house twice for family dinners at Nadine's invitation. She had met Prescott. She had met Vivian. On the one occasion, Vivian had come to dinner when Priya happened to be there, and she had, over the course of the past year, become involved with a whistleblower case that she could not discuss in detail, but that had brought to her attention certain information she believed I needed to have. I met her that afternoon at a coffee shop on Erie Street. She was compact and direct, and she had the particular manner of someone who has decided that the cost of saying the hard thing is lower than the cost of not saying it. She put a manila envelope on the table between us and slid it toward me without flourish and said, "Your husband and your sister have been in a relationship for 14 months. I know this because there is a financial transaction they both participated in that became relevant to a case I was assisting with. The case has since been closed, but this information belongs to you. I'm not doing this to be dramatic. I'm doing this because Nadine told me your daughter is sick and your sister came to that hospital and said what she said, and some things just require a human being to act." I opened the envelope. I looked at what was inside without letting my face do anything. Then I closed it, and I said, "How long have you known?" "6 weeks," she said. "I'm sorry it took me this long." "No," I said. 6 weeks is fine. 6 weeks is exactly right. Because 6 weeks, I had already calculated, was exactly as long as I needed. People think revenge is hot. They think it's the moment you flip the table, the moment you scream, the moment you make them see you. Real revenge is ice cold. Real revenge is a woman sitting at a coffee shop on Erie Street, reading the confirmation of everything she suspected and not spilling a drop of her latte. Here is what the envelope contained: financial records from a joint LLC, Prestige Development Partners, registered in Illinois 11 months ago, in which both Prescott Calloway and Vivian Harlan were 50% partners. The LLC had been capitalized with $420,000 drawn from a family trust account through a mechanism that required only one authorized signature, which was Prescott's, because 12 years ago, when we set up our estate structure, I had signed a spousal authorization that I had understood at the time as a formality, and that I now understood as the instrument of my own disadvantaging. The LLC had made 2 investments. Both had returned nothing. Both, on paper, showed significant losses. Both were controlled by a third entity registered in Nevada under a name I did not recognize that, once I traced it, led back to an operating account that shared a mailing address with Vivian's real estate development company in River North. It was not subtle once you knew how to read it. It was not meant to be subtle to someone who knew how to read it. It was meant to be invisible to a woman who trusted the people managing her financial life and had not been reading her own documents. It was meant specifically to be invisible to me, to the Daphne they thought I was, the beautiful wife who handled school pickups and hospital visits and dinner parties and left the complicated stuff to the grown-ups. They had miscalculated badly. On Monday morning, I was at the offices of Ferrara Hollis LLP on Michigan Avenue, in the conference room of a divorce attorney named Sylvia Okonkwo, who had been described to me by 3 separate sources as the most lethal family law practitioner in Cook County, and who wore a cream blazer and spoke with the quiet precision of someone who has never once in her career needed to raise her voice. I laid out everything: the documents, the amended trust, the LLC, what Caleb had overheard, Priya's envelope. Sylvia read, listened, and asked 4 specific questions. Then she folded her hands and looked at me and said, "Mrs. Calloway, when you leave this office today, I need you to act exactly as you have been acting. Normal, warm, present. Can you do that?" "I've been doing it for 12 years, I said. She smiled. It was the smile of a woman recognizing another woman. "Then you're going to be just fine." I want you to understand something about the next 6 weeks. On the outside, everything was normal. I attended Remy's treatments, I made dimmer, I went to Caleb's school play, I smiled at Prescott over breakfast. I texted Vivian things like, "Thinking of you," and "Let me know if you need anything." I was the most convincing performance of a trusting wife that has ever been staged on Astor Street. And underneath it, I was building something that had no exits. Sylvia's first move was to file a motion to freeze all joint assets based on evidence of unauthorized financial activity, the amended trust documents, the LLC structure, and the pattern of transfers. The motion was filed on a Tuesday and granted by a judge on Thursday, which is the kind of speed that happens when your attorney is very good and your documentation is airtight, and the judge is a woman who has seen this particular pattern before and has no patience for it. Prescott found out on Friday morning when his brokerage firm called him. I was at Lurie with Remy when his name appeared on my phone. I let it ring. I had, by that point, already retained a forensic accountant named Tobias Vance, who had 15 years of experience unwinding exactly these kinds of financial structures for exactly these kinds of cases. Tobias was methodical and humorless and brilliant, and within 2 weeks he had produced a report that showed, with documentary precision, that the LLC had been used to systematically extract money from our marital estate over 11 months, not in large visible transactions, but in small, clean, overlapping moves that were individually unremarkable and collectively devastating. The total moved was $860,000. It had been done with what Tobias described, with professional restraint, as sophisticated concealment. The concealment had not been sophisticated enough for Tobias Vance. It had also not been sophisticated enough for the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation, to whom Sylvia submitted a formal complaint about the Nevada registered entity and its relationship to Vivian's licensed real estate development company. Real estate developers in Illinois are licensed. Licensed professionals have obligations. When a licensed professional uses their business infrastructure to participate in financial fraud against a family member, particularly one involving a sick child's trust assets, regulators are not pleased. Vivian's license review began in December. She did not know it was connected to me. She thought it was a routine audit. I know this because she called me the first week of December while I was making Caleb's lunch and mentioned it with the practiced casualness of a woman trying to gauge how much someone knows. The most annoying thing, she said, the IDF PR is poking around my business. Routine stuff, obviously, but the timing is the worst. Oh no, I said, spreading peanut butter on wheat bread. That sounds stressful. You okay? Totally fine, she said, just annoying. Let me know if you need anything, I said. I put Caleb's lunch in his bag, and I felt something I am not going to call satisfaction because it is too small a word. It was the feeling of a puzzle that has been assembled correctly, all pieces in their proper places, the picture finally visible. I want to talk about Prescott for a moment, because the mistake people make in these stories is assuming the wife is the victim because she loved harder. I didn't love harder. I loved clearly, and when clarity arrived, fully and finally, it didn't make me sad, it made me efficient. Prescott was served in January, on a Wednesday evening, at a dinner with his firm's managing directors at Alienea on North Halsted. The choice of location was Sylvia's, and it was deliberate, because Prescott had spent 12 years conducting his most important business in rooms full of witnesses, and Sylvia believed, correctly, that being witnessed in a moment of vulnerability was a particular kind of useful pressure. He called me from the parking garage in a voice I had never heard him use, stripped of its management consultant smoothness, just a man in a parking garage who suddenly understood that the woman he had been married to for 12 years had seen everything and had waited patiently until she was ready. Daphne, don't come home tonight, I said. There's a hotel reservation at the Waldorf under your name. Sylvia's office made it. You can reach me through her. We need to talk. We do, I said. Through our attorneys. I hung up. I was sitting in Remy's room. She had been moved to a recovery phase by then, responding beautifully, the doctors kept saying, that word that will never not make me cry, and she was propped up with pillows reading a novel about a girl who turns into a wolf, which felt appropriate. She looked at me over the top of her book when I put my phone down. Was that Dad? Yes. Is he coming? Not tonight, baby. She went back to her book. My daughter, who is 11 and reads at a high school level and has always been smarter than the room gives her credit for, said, without looking up, "Good. Now, let me tell you about what I did with Vivian, because Vivian requires a longer answer than a process server and a hotel reservation. There is a woman named Dr. Camille Ostroff who writes a weekly column for Chicago Magazine on wealth, family dynamics, and the social architecture of the city's upper class. She is 47, incisive, and has the specific credibility of a person who has been observing the same ecosystem for long enough to recognize every variation of every pattern. I had met her 4 times at charity events. I knew she was working on a piece about women who had been financially victimized within their own families, a pattern she had been documenting with appropriate anonymity across 18 months of interviews. I also knew, because a mutual acquaintance had mentioned it, that she had been trying to find a subject who would speak openly, on background, about the specific intersection of family betrayal, financial fraud, and the social immunity that wealthy women sometimes extend to the people who harm them. I called her on a Thursday in January and offered to be that subject, off the record, with my attorney's approval, with specific guardrails around what could be said and when. She was, to her credit, professionally measured and personally warm, and we met 3 times over the course of 2 weeks. I told her what had been done, not dramatically, not with tears, with the flat, documented precision of a CPA who knows exactly which numbers tell the story and exactly how to present them for maximum comprehension. Her piece ran in the February issue. It was titled The House Account, and it was about financial abuse inside marriages of wealth, and it was specifically, anonymously, unmistakably about a recognizable pattern in a recognizable neighborhood, and every person in the Gold Coast and Lincoln Park and Winnetka who read it understood exactly whose story was being described without a single name being printed. I know this because 3 women called me in the week after it ran, with the careful, coded language of people reaching out to say, I see you, without saying, I see you. I know this because Constance Calloway's Tuesday Bridge Club, which she had attended without interruption for 22 years, quietly uninvited her in March. I know this because real estate developers in River North operate on reputation, and Vivian's reputation, by February, was in the specific kind of trouble that cannot be managed with a PR firm. Her license review concluded in March. The IDF PR found 3 violations significant enough to result in a suspension, 18 months, with a review at the end. You cannot develop real estate in Illinois without a license. You cannot maintain a professional identity built on competence and dependability when the regulatory body of your industry has publicly found you wanting. Vivian had spent 20 years building a professional self that was armor against everything she feared: irrelevance, dependency, being the kind of woman who needed something from someone. That armor was gone. She called me in March. I almost didn't answer, but I had been waiting for this call the way you wait for the last page of a book you already know the ending of. You need to see it written before you can close the cover. Daphne? Her voice was different, smaller. The searchlight quality was gone, replaced by something I had never once heard from my sister in 41 years of knowing her: uncertainty. Vivian. A long pause. Then, I don't expect you to understand. I understand perfectly, I said. You wanted what I had, and you decided you deserved it more than I did. You've thought that since we were 12 years old. The only new thing is that you finally acted on it. Silence. Remy, she started, is in remission, I said. She's home, she's reading, she's growing her hair back, and she started a podcast about books with her best friend. She is magnificent, and she is fine, and she will be fine in ways that have nothing to do with you. Another silence. Then Vivian said, quietly, What do you want from me? And this is the part that matters. This is the part I had thought about in hospital waiting rooms, and in my car in parking garages, and in the dark of my bedroom at 2 in the morning. What did I want? Not what did I need, not what the law require, not what would feel good for 30 seconds before curdling into something else. What did I actually want from the woman who had stood at my daughter's hospital bed? Nothing, I said. I want nothing from you. I want you to sit with what you did without the buffer of my forgiveness. I want you to understand that I don't hate you, because hating you would mean you still have access to my energy, and you don't. I want you to know that Caleb, your 7-year-old nephew who you never really paid attention to, saved my life. And I want you to understand that the reason you lost wasn't because I'm lucky, or because I got help, or because the law happened to work the way it's supposed to. You lost because you underestimated me. And you underestimated me because you decided a long time ago that the things about me you couldn't measure, patience, attention, memory, love, didn't count. They counted, Vivian. They counted the whole time. I hung up. I sat in the kitchen of my townhouse on Astor Street, which was mine now, fully, cleanly, legally mine, settled in a divorce proceeding that Sylvia had, in her words, concluded definitively. The settlement included the house, the children's trust accounts, and a financial arrangement that Tobias had structured in such a way that the money that had been moved through the LLC was recovered, with interest and legal fees added, in a process that Prescott's attorneys had described privately to Prescott, according to a source I will not name, as surgical. Remy came downstairs in her socks, hair growing back in soft curls, podcast microphone in one hand and a granola bar in the other. Caleb was at the kitchen table doing a science project about ecosystems, how everything connects, how removing one piece affects every other piece, how a system that looks stable can be holding its breath. He was drawing arrows between things. It was the most appropriate visual I could have been offered at that precise moment, and I almost laughed out loud. Mom, Remy said, does formidable have 1 R or 2? 1, I said. Why? I'm describing a character in my review. She's the kind of woman who seems like she's just standing there until you realize she's been holding up the whole building the whole time. I looked at my daughter, 11 years old, in remission, recording a podcast about books in her socks in our kitchen on a Thursday afternoon in March. "That's a perfect description," I said. I poured myself a cup of coffee. The afternoon light came through the kitchen window in the particular way Chicago March light comes in, slanted and uncertain, not yet sure it's allowed to stay, but trying. I sat down at the table next to Caleb and looked at his ecosystem diagram, all those arrows, all those connections, everything affecting everything else. He looked up at me the way he'd been looking at me lately, not the watchful, weighted look of a child carrying something too heavy, but the open, clear look of a kid who put the thing down and found that his hands were free. "You good, Mom?" "Yeah, baby," I said. "I'm really, really good." And the building held, and the light came in, and we were still there. They called me beautiful, like it was the whole of me, like it was a ceiling they could put over my head and I'd never think to push against it. For 12 years, I let them call me that. I smiled and showed up and loved carefully and paid attention to everything, and they saw none of it because they were only looking at the surface. That was their mistake. You cannot hollow out a woman who has been building in the dark her whole life. You can try, but when she's finished building, and she will finish, she won't be standing in the ruins of what you burned. She'll be standing in something you never even knew existed, something she built while you weren't watching, something entirely, permanently, beautifully hers. Don't leave without commenting where you're watching from. I notice every message. I'm thankful you shared this time with me, so please subscribe to stay connected. I'll return with another story shortly. Until then, stay grounded and keep believing.